So right now I'm in Big Sur, and right behind me this entire place is on fire. Now I want to tell you what that has to do with Mount Rushmore, but first let me explain its history. So this is a map of South Dakota. This is the original Lakota Sioux territory. It included much of the Great Plains, parts of Montana and Wyoming, the Black Hills, and the Badlands. So after a lot of fighting and politics, this land was constitutionally designated to the Lakota Sioux through what was called the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868. So these mountains and these rocks were considered the birthplace of all creation, and it was very important that they were protected. So originally what started all of this nonsense was when General Armstrong Custer found gold right here in the Black Hills, and that's what started the gold rush of 1876.
Wild, rugged. That was the Black Hills of South Dakota in the early 1870s. There was gold in them thar hills. The original site of the Homestake mine has disappeared, and in its place has risen a thriving industry geared to modern progress.
So during the gold rush, more and more white settlers came into the Black Hills, and tensions rose between the Lakota Sioux and the miners. So the Lakota Sioux were not going to leave without a fight when all of the gold miners came into this area. So this began a 15-year conflict between the indigenous people in the area and the US military. So in 1877, the Northern Cheyenne, Lakota, and Arapaho warriors got together in the modern-day Wyola, Montana at the Little Bighorn Creek in a battle against US soldiers. Now this was a massive victory for the indigenous people in the area, and the effort was led in part by Crazy Horse. I'd say it's a lot prettier. Well, I don't know. Now this is a beautiful mountain that represents a great victory for the combined forces of the tribes in this area. But although they won that battle, they still lost the war, and Mount Rushmore was just a small part of the price they paid. So the conflict continued until 1890, until the US military was involved in a strike against the Lakota people right here on the Wounded Knee Reservation, which kept them out of the Black Hills for good, confining them to this reservation right here. This was a direct unconstitutional violation of the Treaty of Fort Laramie, signed 22 years earlier. Over 150 Native Americans were killed, and over half of them were women or children. Since then, the Black Hills have no longer been their land. One question this doesn't answer is, why was Mount Rushmore built? But it actually wasn't supposed to be of our presidents at all. So in the early 1920s, the gold miners had already left, and South Dakotan historians were thinking of a way to bring more people into their state. Because without gold, the only other option you have is really tourism. I mean, look at California. So they decided they wanted a monument sculpted into the side of a mountain in the Black Hills that represented Western expansion. One idea was to have Sacagawea and Lewis and Clark. Then they hired this guy, Gutzon Borglum, who had his own plans. So directly behind me is Gutzon Borglum's first project, which is the Monument to the Confederacy on Stone Mountain. This is a beautiful mountain, but carved into it is a statue of General Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and Stonewall Jackson, which were very prominent figures in the Confederacy. Now this land that I'm standing on was actually home to many KKK rallies in the 30s, and it was owned by the Venable brothers, which were very famous, very wealthy members of the KKK. I'm gonna see if I can get closer just so you can see the scale of this place, because seriously, there's no way this place is real. Look at this. Dippin' Dots, roller coasters, like what, is this Disneyland? Confederate soldier shortly before his death. So in other words, this is a war memorial to those who were in the Confederacy who died in the Civil War. It's just sad that this is how America still thinks in some parts. He was also involved in the politics of the KKK, and in letters wrote pretty heinous things about indigenous people in this country. So yeah, it shouldn't be a surprise that he didn't want to sculpt a giant statue of a Native American woman, and instead opted for 4 white dudes, or 4 American presidents. Mount Rushmore was carved into what was originally named the 6 grandfathers, after the sky, the earth, and the 4 cardinal directions. This mountain in particular was one of the spiritual hotspots for the tribe, to put it most simply. Kind of like vortexes to white people in Sedona. So yeah, it has a racist history, and even today, while many Americans say it represents the success of democracy or our expansion of American values,
this monument will never be desecrated.
To the Lakota Sioux and the indigenous Americans around the country, it represents desecration of their entire culture and whitewashing of the land. So the damage has already been done. You can't unblow up a mountain, you can't uncarve a mountain, but there are a few things that we can do. Constitutionally speaking, this land belongs to the Lakota Sioux. So if it were up to me, I'd say we give it back to them and we let them take care of it the way it's meant to be taken care of. So it's not crazy, scary, or even that extreme to give land back to Native Americans. And in 2020, we're starting to see more and more of that land be given back, including in Oklahoma and in Big Sur. The reason I mentioned the wildfires earlier in this video is because this might be an indicator that we're really bad at taking care of the land.
Never in the American West has so much burned so quickly.
This is a climate damn emergency. This is real. And it's happening. This is the perfect storm. It is happening in unprecedented ways.
While we mine it, exploit it, and carve our faces into the land, the indigenous people who were here before us were stewards of it. So over 250 years ago, before the Esselen tribe was moved out of the Big Sur area, they practiced something called controlled burnings, which you may have seen on the side of a freeway. Now they were very particular about how they did this, and the way they did it made it almost as if they were a part of nature. They were a part of that process of wildfire seasons, of burning and regrowing when the rains came later in the year. So hopefully what we start to see is that the Esselen tribe will go back to controlled burnings that went away 250 years ago. And hopefully next year we'll see less of the wildfires that we're seeing this year in 2020. And I don't have all the answers, I'm not going to talk about politics, but I do want to talk about treading lightly on land that's not yours. The more time you spend out in nature, the more willing you are to take up certain efforts to preserve it. So I just took my car off-roading quite a ways, and I'm gonna show you how far I went, but look at this. I want you to take a visit to the Black Hills. Spend time in nature. Seriously. The Sioux believe this is the birthplace of all creation. This place is enormous. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful contrast of gray and green, and while we can't undo the damage that has been done, we can protect what's still here. We could tread lightly and just sit in nature.